Welcome to Revolutionary Gazette. My name's James, and I'm here today to tell you about a wonderful new book, Noble Volunteers by Don Hagist. It looks at the British soldier of the American Revolution through his everyday social life, his interactions with civilians, how he would have lived his life, gone through his work as a soldier, and experienced life during the American Revolutionary War. This is a book that stands up with the great classics of soldier studies. Many of you may have read Hardtack and Coffee or Billy Yank and Johnny Reb. This is that Revolutionary War version, looking at the British soldier's perspective, all the way from where he came in his civilian life, his training, his life in the army, including the side jobs he would have worked. Many of them, of course, kept up their tailoring, their shoemaking professions, anything that they brought with them from civilian life into the army. It also looks at their time serving in the army, whether that be in their combat roles, whether that be their service back in Britain or serving in the colony. So it offers us a really wide range of experiences to learn more about the average life of that British soldier. It's really important to note that very little time relatively is spent in combat. Most of these men are on the march, they're in garrison in various towns or in camp, and this book really takes a look at just what that life was like. And this really highlights to us the suffering that a lot of them went through, the hardships that a lot of them went through, as well as some of the more comical stories. It's chock full of primary sources, including court-martial reports, pension records, one of the best ways you can learn about British soldiers in the American Revolution, muster rolls, and letters written from the soldiers themselves. So it gives us a very clear, really interesting look into the life of that junior British soldier, the man who might not be leading the fight against the American Revolution, but the man who's undertaking the hardest part of it, that private soldier, that rank and file man in the line who is there doing his job to help support what he viewed as the rightful government and restore law and order to the wayward American colonies. One of the main fascinating points that Higgs argues that I'm going to continue taking with me is just how steady of an option joining the army was for many of lower and middle class life in Great Britain. Whereas many jobs had potentially horrible hardships for very low pay, the army at least offered meals, they offered clothing, and they offered a chance to continue your employment, perhaps not under a abusive master who you were going through your apprenticeship with, or they offered you the ability to learn new skills. The army offered you the option to learn yourself. Of course, they wanted non-commissioned officers who were literate, who could read, who could write, and within each regiment they would have schools to train these soldiers to read, to write, and train their soldiers' children as well. We know that many of these soldiers themselves were sons of the regiment, meaning that they had been brought up in the army, and as soon as they were old enough may have served as a drummer in that role, and eventually serving in the rank and file. You have countless soldiers who come of age during the American Revolution who will prove to be very important later on with British military history, including folks such as Sir John Moore, who will be famous during the Napoleonic Wars for his light infantry tactics, and other young officers. So this everyday life of the British soldier and how they learn to develop both as leaders, the led, and as well as professionals performing a duty is something that really stands out very strongly in Hagist's work. While other works heavily focus on the tactics and the strategy, this book is solely about that social life of the British soldier, the punishments he underwent, the grueling fatigues, the experiences he had dealing with the civilian population serving in the Americas as well as back home in Great Britain. If you want to know anything about the British soldier and his life, his everyday life, which is very important, you need to read Don's new book. It is absolutely fantastic. I recommend it to anyone. It's a really great read because it's told in this sort of story sense, using the transcriptions of the documents the soldiers provided themselves. It's just beautifully written, a great read, comical at many points, sad at others. If you're just getting into the American Revolution or just getting into British military history, I highly suggest this be one of the first books you pick up to truly understand what life was like for soldiers both in the British Army as well as opening up to just average military life in the 18th century. For Revolutionary War Gazette, I'm James, and we'll catch everybody on the next edition.